How does a fifth-round draft pick end up dominating the entire rookie class? That's exactly what happened with Shedeur Sanders, and it's something the NFL hasn't seen before. While top picks were celebrating first-round headlines, a Day 3 selection quietly turned into the number 1 selling rookie jersey in the league. Not second, not top 5, number 1. And according to reports circulating online, his jersey sales may have generated tens of millions in revenue already. Numbers usually reserved for established Pro Bowl veterans, not rookies who slipped to pick 144. That's not normal. This wasn't a slow burn, it exploded almost overnight. Fans flooded merchandise sites. Social media buzzed. Analysts who questioned his draft slide suddenly had to confront something bigger than scouting grades. Because this isn't just about football. It's about influence, it's about brand power. And it raises one massive question: did the league underestimate what Shedeur Sanders actually represents? Draft night was supposed to be predictable. Most projections had Shedeur Sanders coming off the board far earlier than the 5th round. Some analysts had him pegged as a Day 2 lock. A few even floated late first-round buzz months before the draft. But when the lights were brightest and picks started flying, his name just didn't come up. Round 1 passed. Round 2 passed. By round 3, social media was already buzzing. By round 4, the conversation shifted from surprise to disbelief. When he finally came off the board in the 5th round, it felt less like a normal evaluation and more like a statement. And that's where the speculation started. Some critics suggested teams were concerned about fit. Others pointed to system translation from college to the NFL. A few analysts questioned whether his confidence, sometimes labeled as swagger, would resonate in certain locker rooms. And then there were whispers about spotlight fatigue, about whether the constant media attention surrounding him and his father created hesitation for front offices. It's important to be clear, no team publicly stated a single defining reason. Draft slides happen every year. Prospects fall for complex, layered reasons that rarely get fully explained. But this one felt different. Because Sanders wasn't an unknown project, he had production, he had visibility, he had experience playing under pressure, and yet teams kept passing. That's what made the 5th round label stick. In NFL culture, draft position carries weight. A first-rounder is viewed as a cornerstone. A second-rounder is an investment. A 5th-round pick, that's often considered developmental depth, a backup, a long shot. And that's the box many expected him to enter. But here, what made this slide fascinating: the public reaction didn't match the league's decision. Instead of fans quietly accepting the evaluation, something unusual happened. The debate intensified. Supporters rallied. Online conversations exploded. Instead of shrinking his presence, the draft slide amplified it. For some fans, it became fuel. Fuel for proving doubters wrong. Fuel for questioning league evaluations. Fuel for turning a draft position into a chip on the shoulder. And that shift in energy matters. Because while teams were making football decisions, the marketplace was watching emotionally, and emotion drives engagement. By the time draft weekend ended, the narrative had flipped. It wasn't just, why did he fall? It became, did the league just underestimate him? That question lingered. And as the season approached, something even more unexpected began to happen. The numbers off the field started telling a completely different story than the draft board ever did. And that's when the real disruption began. And then the numbers dropped. Almost overnight, Shedeur Sanders wasn't being discussed for where he was drafted, he was being discussed for what he was selling. According to reports from merchandise tracking outlets and fan retail data, Sanders quickly climbed to the number 1 spot in rookie jersey sales. Not top 5, not top 3, number 1. That means he reportedly outsold higher draft picks like Cam Ward and Travis Hunter, players selected significantly earlier. Pause on that for a second. A 5th-round pick leading the entire rookie class in merchandise demand is almost unheard of. Historically, jersey sales correlate with draft hype. First-round quarterbacks dominate. Top 5 picks flood the charts. That's the pattern. This wasn't the pattern. Some analysts have cited estimates suggesting his early jersey wave generated tens of millions in revenue. While exact league-certified numbers aren't fully public, the surge itself was undeniable. Retail platforms experienced spikes, fan discussions multiplied. His name started trending not for draft position but for sales velocity. That's a different kind of power. Because jersey sales don't lie about one thing: engagement. You don't buy a jersey casually, you buy it because you believe in something: the player, the story, the identity, and that's what made this explosion fascinating. Fans weren't reacting to preseason touchdowns, they weren't responding to playoff moments. This happened before he even took meaningful NFL snaps. That tells you something deeper was at work. For many supporters, the draft slide became motivation. Buying the jersey felt like participation. It felt like backing a narrative, almost like casting a vote. And here, where it gets even more interesting. There were reports circulating that, immediately after the draft, some fans intentionally avoided official league merchandise platforms and instead purchased directly from Sanders' personal website. At the time, his limited personal merchandise reportedly sold out quickly. Whether organized or organic, the movement showed loyalty that extended beyond standard rookie excitement. This wasn't passive support. It felt coordinated, intentional. And that energy shifted perception. Front offices evaluate quarterbacks based on arm strength, processing speed, and scheme fit. But owners and marketing departments see another layer: brand movement, market pull, franchise relevance. When a rookie can move merchandise at that level before starting a game, executives take notice. Because in the modern NFL, quarterbacks aren't just evaluated by wins, they're evaluated by reach, by social engagement, by how many eyes they bring to a franchise. That's what made the jersey sales explosion more than just a cool stat. It was leverage. It signaled that draft position doesn't automatically define public demand. It hinted that influence can outpace scouting grades, and it quietly shifted the conversation from developmental prospect to market driver. But as big as the jersey numbers were, they were only the beginning. Because once former MVP voices started weighing in publicly, this story moved from impressive to undeniable. But the jersey numbers weren't even the most interesting part. What really caught people's attention was what happened immediately after draft weekend. As Shedeur Sanders slid into the 5th round, frustration poured across social media. Fans weren't just debating football anymore, they were questioning the evaluation process itself. And then something unusual started trending. Instead of immediately buying his official NFL jersey through league platforms, many supporters began encouraging each other to purchase directly from Sanders' personal merchandise site. The message was simple: support him directly. Now, to be clear, there was no confirmed organized boycott in an official sense, but online chatter suggested that fans were intentionally steering dollars away from the league store and toward his own branded merchandise. Within days, the limited items on his personal website reportedly sold out. That's not typical rookie behavior. Most players rely entirely on league-distributed merchandise, but this felt different. It felt personal. It wasn't just about owning a jersey, it was about sending a message. For many supporters, the 5th round slide didn't feel like standard draft variance. It felt like disrespect, and buying directly from Sanders' own platform became a way to respond, a way to say, we see the value even if teams didn't. That shift is powerful, because direct-to-fan engagement changes leverage. When a player proves he can mobilize supporters outside of traditional league channels, it signals independence. It shows brand infrastructure that doesn't rely solely on team marketing departments. In today's NFL, that matters. Quarterbacks aren't just employees of franchises anymore. They're individual brands with social media followings, business partnerships, and personal platforms. Sanders had already built that foundation during his college career. The draft slide simply activated it. And here's the deeper layer. When fans bypass traditional systems to support an athlete directly, it strengthens emotional investment. They're not just consumers at that point, they feel like participants in the journey. They feel like they're backing an underdog narrative in real time. That emotional connection translates into long-term loyalty. It also creates subtle pressure. Front offices monitor engagement metrics. Ownership groups track merchandise movement. Marketing executives pay attention to social traction. When a fifth-round pick sparks that level of consumer mobilization, it forces recalibration. Because suddenly, this isn't just about quarterback mechanics. It's about cultural pull. The so-called boycott moment, whether loosely organized or purely organic, highlighted something the draft board couldn't measure: influence that operates independently of league validation. And that's when the story shifted from surprising sales numbers to something much bigger. Because once former MVPs and league veterans started publicly acknowledging what was happening, it became clear this wasn't just hype. It was momentum building in real time. And then Cam Newton said what a lot of people were thinking, but weren't bold enough to say out loud. He didn't just call Shedeur Sanders talented. He didn't just say he had upside. He labeled him a cultural icon in today's NFL. That's a heavy phrase. Because cultural icon doesn't mean solid starter, it doesn't mean promising rookie, it means influence that stretches beyond the field, influence that shifts conversations, influence that changes how the league feels. When Newton broke down the reported jersey revenue numbers, some estimates suggesting tens of millions generated early, he sounded stunned. And this is coming from a former MVP who understands brand power firsthand. He's seen breakout stars, he's lived through endorsement waves, he knows what real traction looks like. So when he paused and acknowledged that a fifth-round quarterback commanding that kind of marketplace response is rare, it carried weight. Because Cam isn't just analyzing tape. He's analyzing presence. And that's the key distinction. Newton pointed out that Sanders walked into the league already carrying a brand bigger than most rookies could dream of. That doesn't happen by accident. That comes from years of visibility, confidence, preparation, and identity building. Some critics had framed Sanders' swagger as too much, too polished, too media-savvy, but Cam flipped that narrative. He suggested that what some people labeled as arrogance was actually brand awareness, self-belief, control over image. And in today's NFL, that matters. The modern quarterback isn't just a play caller, he's a content driver, a social media presence, a marketing pillar, a face of the franchise before he even wins a playoff game. Newton understands that evolution better than most. He experienced it. So when he says Sanders fits the era perfectly, that isn't hype, it's perspective. He also touched on something deeper. Sanders doesn't shrink himself to fit traditional expectations. He doesn't dilute his personality to make people comfortable. He leans into who he is, the confidence, the polish, the visibility, and that consistency builds trust with fans. And when fans trust you, they invest. That's what separates a viral moment from sustained movement. It's easy to trend for a weekend, it's harder to maintain loyalty across months of scrutiny. Newton emphasized that Sanders' composure, even through draft night tension and criticism, reinforced the brand narrative rather than weakening it. That's powerful. Because the slide to the fifth round could have shifted perception negatively, instead, it intensified engagement. Newton's cultural icon comment wasn't about declaring superstardom on the field. It was about recognizing something happening off it, a shift in how influence works in the NFL. Draft boards measure arm strength and scheme fit, but culture measures connection. And right now, Sanders appears to be winning the cultural battle in a way few rookies ever have. But if the jersey numbers made headlines and Cam's comments gave it legitimacy, what happened next pushed this story into completely different territory. Because once global brands got involved, this stopped being a football conversation. It became a business one. Just when people thought the jersey numbers were the peak, another wave hit, and this one came from a global powerhouse. Nike stepped into the picture. When Nike launched a Shedeur Sanders themed sneaker collection, the response wasn't calm. It wasn't gradual, it was explosive. Reports circulating online claimed the drop generated roughly $20 million in just 48 hours. Now, exact internal numbers haven't been publicly audited in full detail, so it's important to frame that carefully. But the speed of the sell-through and online traffic spikes were undeniable. 2 days. That's the kind of number brands celebrate at the end of a quarter, not a weekend. And what made this even more striking? Sanders hadn't played a full NFL season yet. This wasn't fueled by playoff heroics or MVP headlines, it was built on narrative. Nike didn't treat it like a basic rookie endorsement. They didn't just slap a logo on a shoe and hope hype would carry it. They leaned into storytelling. They highlighted his journey, his draft slide, his college grind, his identity. That matters. Because today's consumers don't just buy products, they buy alignment, they buy story, they buy energy. The sneaker launch reportedly featured elements from his earlier football days, tying his college roots to his pro future. That subtle detail created emotional continuity. Fans who had followed him from Colorado felt like they were part of the evolution. That's powerful marketing, but it's also powerful influence. There's a difference between an athlete promoting a product and an athlete moving a culture. When fans line up digitally or physically because they feel invested in the person, that's not transactional, that's relational. And that's where Sanders stands out. This wasn't random virality, it was infrastructure built over years: social presence, visibility, controlled narrative, consistent branding. Nike didn't gamble blindly. They saw engagement metrics, they saw loyalty, they saw a fan base that moves when he moves. And that's rare territory for a rookie. Think about the timing. This launch happened early, not after 5 seasons, not after a Super Bowl appearance. Brands usually wait for sustained proof. Nike moved early and moved big. That signals confidence. It also sends a message to the league. When a 5th-round pick can drive sneaker sales at that scale, even if reported numbers fluctuate, executives notice, agents notice, competing brands notice. Because this isn't just about shoes. It's about market gravity. Sanders didn't need on-field accolades to create commercial pull. His presence alone generated demand. That's leverage most rookies don't even approach. And here's the bigger implication. If jersey dominance showed fan loyalty, and Cam Newton's comments validated cultural impact, the Nike frenzy proved something even stronger. Influence doesn't wait for draft position approval. It builds its own lane. And once the details of his endorsement structure started surfacing, the business side of the NFL realized this wasn't just momentum. It was disruption. This is where the story shifts from impressive to almost unbelievable. According to multiple reports circulating online, Shedeur Sanders secured a massive endorsement agreement with Nike before even taking a regular season NFL snap. Now, it's important to frame this carefully. Exact contract figures have not been fully disclosed publicly by Nike, and some of the numbers being discussed come from media reports and industry insiders rather than official filings. But here's what's being claimed. Reports suggest the original structure of the deal was valued around $125 million, with a significant guaranteed portion. Then, once Sanders officially transitioned into the NFL and activated certain professional clauses, the valuation allegedly escalated, potentially doubling over time based on performance triggers and brand benchmarks. If those figures are even close to accurate, that's historic territory for a rookie. Because traditionally, major 9-figure endorsement deals are reserved for proven superstars, players with MVP awards, championships, years of dominance, not quarterbacks who just heard their name called in the 5th round. And that's what makes this so disruptive. This wasn't a small prove-it partnership. It was structured with long-term upside, incentive escalators, performance-based activations. Some reports even claim Sanders negotiated a significant share of jersey-related revenue participation, though again, those specifics haven't been independently confirmed in full detail. Still, even the framework of the deal signals something powerful. It suggests Nike wasn't betting on immediate stat sheets. They were betting on trajectory. They were betting on cultural gravity. They were betting on sustained engagement. And here's the contrast that makes this story louder. On draft day, teams passed on him multiple times. Analysts debated ceiling. Commentators questioned evaluation logic. But in corporate boardrooms, a global brand allegedly structured a deal that could reach into $250 territory over time. That's not just confidence. That's conviction. It also changes leverage. When a player enters the league with that kind of commercial backing, especially if reports of revenue splits and escalators are accurate, he's negotiating from strength. He's not financially dependent on draft slot. he's not waiting for validation through contracts alone. He already has infrastructure, and that sends ripples through the industry. Agents study it, other prospects take notes, brands begin scouting cultural traction earlier in the draft process, front offices start factoring marketability into long-term evaluation more seriously. This is bigger than one contract. It's a shift in power dynamics. Of course, endorsement dominance doesn't guarantee football success. Business wins don't replace execution on Sundays. But what this structure proves, or at least strongly suggests, is that draft position no longer strictly defines market value. Sanders may have slipped on draft boards, but in the marketplace, if reports are even partially accurate, he didn't slip at all. He ascended. And that contradiction, fifth-round selection, potential nine-figure brand structure, is exactly why this story refuses to slow down. Because now the question isn't just about football. It's about who really controls value in today's NFL. Here's the contradiction that makes this entire story impossible to ignore. On paper, Shedeur Sanders is a fifth-round pick 144. That draft slot usually signals developmental depth, a backup projection, a long-term project. But in the business world, he's being talked about alongside nine-figure endorsement territory. That contrast is jarring. Because historically, draft position dictates opportunity, first-round quarterbacks get the marketing push. They get the early sponsorship attention. They're labeled franchise faces before they ever take a snap. Fifth-rounders are supposed to grind quietly and earn relevance over years. Sanders flipped that script instantly. While higher picks like Cam Ward and Travis Hunter were selected much earlier, reports suggest Sanders may already be outpacing many of them in total endorsement value and merchandise traction. That's not a knock on those players, it's a reflection of market behavior. And market behavior is ruthless. It doesn't care about draft boards, it responds to attention, engagement, identity. This is where the league faces a fascinating shift. Draft evaluations are built on measurable traits: arm strength, processing speed, scheme fit, upside. But market impact is driven by narrative control, personality alignment, cultural traction, and fan loyalty. Sanders entered the NFL with a fully built narrative. He had visibility from his college career. He had a recognizable last name thanks to Deion Sanders. He had confidence that some praised and others criticized. And most importantly, he leaned into it instead of shrinking from it. That consistency created brand gravity. So when reports surfaced about endorsement structures possibly reaching into quarter-billion territory over time, even if incentive-based and performance-driven, it sent a shockwave through traditional thinking. Because if a fifth-round quarterback can command that kind of off-field valuation, what does draft slot really mean anymore? That's the deeper question. Draft order still determines rookie contract size, it still signals how teams value a player internally, but the marketplace now operates on a separate track. Influence runs parallel to football evaluation. And in Sanders' case, those two tracks diverged sharply. Teams passed on him multiple times, yet global brands reportedly aligned early and aggressively. That contrast exposes something interesting about modern sports economics. Teams evaluate risk through performance metrics, while brands evaluate potential through audience pull. Sanders checked the audience box loudly, and that shifts leverage in subtle ways. A player with major endorsement infrastructure doesn't rely solely on team salary. He enters negotiations differently. He approaches media differently. He controls narrative differently. It's not arrogance. It's positioning. Of course, long-term success will still be measured on the field. Endorsements don't throw touchdowns. Marketing power doesn't read coverages. At some point, performance must match hype. But right now, the tension between fifth-round status and elite brand value is what makes this moment historic. Because for decades, draft boards define ceiling. Now, influence might be redefining it. And if this trend continues, the blueprint for how quarterbacks build power in the NFL could change permanently. This is where things stop being about one player and start being about the future of the league. Because what Shedeur Sanders is doing right now doesn't just boost his own profile. It quietly challenges the traditional blueprint of how NFL power is built. For decades, the formula was simple: get drafted high, prove yourself on the field, win games, earn endorsements later. Brand value followed football success. But Sanders flipped that order. He built visibility early. He controlled his narrative before the league could define it. He entered the draft already carrying a fully formed identity. And when the draft didn't go as expected, that brand didn't shrink, it expanded. That's the shift. Agents are watching closely, future prospects are taking notes, brands are paying attention earlier in the process. Instead of waiting 3 years to see who breaks out statistically, companies are now evaluating cultural traction before a rookie ever throws a pass. That changes leverage. It means market pull can exist independently from draft slot. It means audience engagement might matter almost as much as arm talent in long-term valuation discussions. It means that players who understand storytelling, consistency, and visibility can build equity even when traditional evaluation systems hesitate. And let's be clear, this doesn't make draft boards irrelevant. Teams still need quarterbacks who can execute. Coaches still care about reads, footwork, leadership, and composure under pressure. But influence now runs parallel to performance. Sanders represents that parallel track perfectly. His rise highlights something modern sports executives can't ignore. Fans don't just invest in production. They invest in personality, in journey, in perceived authenticity. And authenticity can't be manufactured overnight. For years, Sanders operated under intense visibility thanks in part to his father, Deion Sanders. Some critics argued that spotlight created unfair advantages. Others suggested it added pressure. But here's the twist: that spotlight also forced him to develop brand discipline early. He learned how to handle cameras, how to communicate, how to own attention rather than be overwhelmed by it. That preparation became infrastructure. So when draft night adversity hit, he didn't disappear. He doubled down. And that resilience is what brands recognize. Because in today's sports economy, narrative control is currency. The ability to shape your story before someone else frames it, that's power. Sanders didn't wait for validation. He leaned into his identity, stayed consistent, and allowed the market to respond. And respond it did. The ripple effect is already visible. Prospects entering future drafts will think more intentionally about branding. Agents will negotiate differently. Marketing departments will evaluate rookies not just on tape, but on engagement metrics. This isn't just a hot streak. It's a blueprint expansion. Now the only remaining question is the most important one. Can the on-field growth keep pace with the off-field momentum? Because if those two align, then what we're watching isn't just a breakout. It's the evolution of how NFL stars are built. So now we're left with the real question. Is this just a hot streak, or are we watching the future of the NFL unfold in real time? On paper, Shedeur Sanders is still a fifth-round draft pick. That label doesn't disappear. It follows him into training camp, into preseason reps, into every snap he takes. Draft position is permanent ink in league history. But the marketplace tells a completely different story. Number 1 rookie jersey sales, explosive sneaker drops, reported 9-figure endorsement structures, cultural traction that outpaced several higher draft picks. That contrast is what makes this moment historic. Because traditionally, influence followed performance. You proved yourself on the field first. You earned the endorsements later. You stacked wins before stacking business leverage. Sanders reversed that order. He entered the league with infrastructure already built, visibility already secured, loyalty already activated, and when the draft slide happened, instead of shrinking his brand, it amplified it. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when narrative meets preparation. Now let's stay balanced. Endorsement power doesn't guarantee playoff wins, jersey revenue doesn't read coverages, hype doesn't execute 2-minute drills. At some point, the football side has to match the momentum. And that's where the real test begins. If the on-field growth aligns with the off-field power, this story becomes generational. If performance accelerates alongside brand dominance, then the fifth-round label becomes a footnote, not a ceiling. But even if he becomes just a solid starter, something bigger has already shifted. Because this moment exposed a new reality, draft slot no longer fully defines market value. Fans respond to connection, brands respond to engagement, influence operates on its own timeline now, and in that ecosystem, quarterbacks aren't just evaluated by scouts, they're evaluated by culture. That's the disruption. For years, front offices controlled the narrative, draft position shaped perception, media framed identity. Now players can build infrastructure before stepping onto an NFL field. Sanders didn't wait for validation. He built leverage early, and that forces the league to adapt. Agents will negotiate differently, prospects will develop personal brands earlier, corporations will scout cultural momentum before the draft, owners will pay closer attention to engagement metrics alongside arm strength. That's not a fluke. That's evolution. So the real question is whether Shedeur Sanders deserved to go earlier in the draft. The real question is whether the NFL's evaluation system is fully calibrated for this era. Because when a fifth-round pick commands this level of attention, revenue, and influence before completing a full season, something fundamental is shifting. And if this is year one, imagine what year three could look like. This isn't just a breakout story. It might be a blueprint,